Well, let's get started. I'm Becky McCray, and I am from Oklahoma.
And I'm Deb Brown. I am from Biloxi, Mississippi.
Every
Now,
other year now. Okay, so here's the thing. We're gonna present. Put your questions and comments in the chat all along. We'll try to keep up with some of those, and we will definitely save time at the end to also answer questions at the end. So every other year, we open up our survey of rural challenges, and it is a collaboration between SaveYour.Town and then smallbizsurvival.com. And we open that to anyone who wants to share what life is really like in their small town. So over 2,200 people from all across the US and Canada and even beyond have chimed in with their stories and their challenges and their hopes. And what makes our survey special compared to some of the other rural surveys out there is that it's about hearing directly from the people who live and work in these places. It's not just about numbers, and it's not just about outside opinions. So we all get a front row seat to what's changing and what's staying the same and what really matters in small towns and rural areas, especially straight from the people who know them best. So we're going to share that with you today. Now, our latest report digs into all of those responses, going all the way back to 2015. And there are some surprising conclusions to share in there. And we're going to also talk about some communities who are taking action because they are responding to these challenges. And that's because even when we ask people about their challenges, they immediately start talking about what action they're taking as well. So as you listen, feel free, put those questions in the chat box. We're going to bring them up during Q&A. Also, feel free to throw in anything that you hear that you're like, ooh, I like that, or that's interesting. Or if something is challenging and you're like, I'm not sure about that, feel free to start that conversation in the chat because we have left time for this to be plenty interactive. And Deb is going to start us off with the persistent challenges.
and some challenges just keep showing up at the top of the list year after year. Even in 2021, when you'd think the pandemic and all that economic upheaval would have shaken things up, these longstanding issues still outrank the newer problems. So if you're working to support rural communities and rural businesses and you're not addressing these top challenges, you're really missing what matters to the people. These aren't just passing concerns. They're the ongoing needs that folks deal with every day. So let's make sure our solutions actually match up with what rural people are telling us they need most. The next persistent challenge, the first one I'm going to talk about, is downtown decline. The decline of downtowns is one of the most visible signs of change in rural communities. Economic realities have changed what kind of shops and services exist downtown. And for a lot of folks, that's happened during their lifetimes. This shows up in the open-ended survey comments as well, with people sharing about boarded up buildings, lack of businesses, and no life downtown. It's not just about empty storefronts either. A big part of the problem is a lack of investment in downtown infrastructure, which means there aren't enough usable commercial spaces for new businesses to move into. In response, some towns are finding creative ways to make more of what they do have downtown. The Colfax, Washington Downtown Association worked with a local business owner to divide up one building for 8 to 10 tiny businesses. Local people started businesses in those booths, selling women's clothes, handcrafted soaps, and really some fun upcycled stuff. The Chamber and Downtown Group also had their offices in there. What a great use of the space. The next persistent challenge is small business marketing.
Deb, let me
I
interrupt right
missed
quick.
one. Yeah, the young people, didn't I?
Did you skip the young people? Do you have that in front of
Sometimes
you?
that happens.
Do you have the text for it, or you want me to present about that?
The loss of young people is definitely in the top 5 challenges, and it's persistent. We hear about it all the time. And
Let me go ahead because I have the text in front of me. Okay. Instead of
okay,
letting you struggle around.
I'd have figured it out.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So one of the things that we've seen is too many people have encouraged our youth to get their education and then get out of town. And so there is a need for more entrepreneurial thinking in rural places, and a lot of business opportunities go unfilled because of it. And that is tied to the loss of our young people. But in some places like Forest County, Pennsylvania, they are turning things around by investing in entrepreneurship training for the students right in the schools. And they even brought us in. Deb was our primary person there to go and teach students how to take their business ideas and break them down into manageable real world steps. So this was about shifting mindsets, one small action at a time. So Deb, you want to go ahead with marketing?
Yeah, let's talk marketing. And it's still a big hurdle for small town businesses. Most small businesses are trying to navigate the world of online marketing. And let's be honest, it's tough to keep up and really feel confident about it. If your businesses are feeling lost, they're not alone. To learn about their specific online marketing challenges, talk and listen to them. Feature your stars, like the Daisy Village in Alva, Oklahoma, because it's easiest for businesses to learn from other businesses, and ask who helps them, because those helpers can be resources too. And make sure any training that happens, it's during hours that business owners can attend. And the last of the persistent challenges is workforce. Workforce challenges aren't just a small town problem, but rural businesses definitely have it tougher with a smaller pool of people to hire from. That makes sense. The catch is employees are often named as one of the biggest strengths in rural businesses, even while those same businesses are struggling to find new folks to join the team. Here's a practical idea from you. The Blue Collar Career Fair. Tony Guidros from San Saba, Texas, he rounded up heavy equipment operators, an HVAC contractor, a stonemason, a plumber, an electrician, and I think a welder, all in one spot, so students could get hands-on experience. And Tony's goal was really simple: open kids' eyes to high demand, high paying local jobs that don't require a 4-year degree. This is the new mindset in action. Instead of letting grades or language barriers keep kids from even applying, employers are reaching out directly and showing them what's possible.
It's such a smart way to do a career fair.
Mhm.
And Carrie says in the comments, that is a great idea, which that's why we pick these ideas up when we see them. The next set of challenges are these ones that are fast moving. And some of you have been sitting there going, when are they going to talk about housing? Well, this is where, because it is one of the fast moving challenges. They have, some of these will surprise some folks and even some rural folks, because this is different from that kind of accepted view of what small towns are. And these actually call for very quick responses from all kinds of rural serving organizations, our policymakers, and our local leaders. And of course, housing is the big challenge. And it actually, I don't know if you remember, but like it used to be a big selling point for small towns, and is now one of our biggest headaches, because back in 2015 and 2017, there were hardly any mentions of housing as a problem on our survey. In fact, people talked about how their affordable housing was seen as an asset, drawing people out from pricier cities. But starting in 2019, that changed, because housing shot up the list suddenly and has stayed in the top 3 ever since. People are talking about rising prices and the number of older homes that are falling into disrepair, homes that are disappearing over time, and not nearly enough new construction to keep up with all of this. So we do have 2 housing action stories for you. And the first one is from Caldwell, Kansas. They had an opportunity because their hospital moved from their old building that was near downtown to a new building that they built out on the outskirts of town. And that left this big empty space, which was room for more housing. But the process, endless board meetings, the competing priorities of all the different organizations, this just stalled the discussion for a long time. And so Vision Caldwell, which is their local vision kind of organization, brought all the players together from all these multiple organizations, and we did it at the site so that everyone could see and imagine what was possible. And so that shifted the discussion from each group's own needs to what was best for the community as a whole. So now the lots are owned by a group that is moving forward with developing that new housing. The second housing action story comes from Major County, Oklahoma. They were also tired of just talking about the need for new housing. So Janae Bernard, who is the economic development director there, loaded up the members of her board in a bus and she drove them past every single house in town. And that just changed the conversation. Suddenly they went from talking about it. They immediately approved building 2 spec houses on a lot that they already owned. And then both of those sold promptly. And so now they're working on a whole new development area. So just making sure that everyone saw the scale of the issue really changed the conversation. And before we move on, Stephen Taylor from Kentucky says, what specific small business supports are missing? And we are going to talk about that in more detail, especially when we get to the action steps. So that is coming up, Stephen. Okay. The next fast growing concern is childcare, and the shortage of childcare in rural areas has really gone from this quiet concern to a full blown crisis, because people tell us they are driving long distances and hours to deliver and pick up their kids from daycare every single working day. So families who might consider moving into a town are often thinking twice or not coming at all. So one of the creative solutions that we're hearing a lot more about is intergenerational care, which just means having people from different ends of the age spectrum together. So in Laverne, Oklahoma, and this is a town of 1,200 people, Lana Schaefer and her neighbors are part of the group that came together to launch Parkview Point, which was a senior living community. And just recently, they added the Parkview Pals, which is childcare, right inside that same building. So the seniors and the toddlers actually get to interact a little bit. They're sharing the space. They get to learn from each other a little bit. And so it's not just better social interaction, but it's also making better use of that facility. Like they're sharing that certified kitchen. They get to share some of the staff. So it's one of those heartwarming stories. And I would so love to see this idea get shared around. And then the second child care action story is also about shared facilities. This is from New Ulm, Minnesota. Now, this is a big town. This is population 14,000, and they used the pod model, where multiple licensed providers can operate out of this shared building. So Heather Bragle, who is their economic development director, told me that their economic development authority took the lead by finding that building and buying it and doing the remodeling. And they made space for 4 providers and offered it at a little bit less than market rate rent as an incentive to get more providers in town. And so the way they covered the cost of this project, they got grants and donations for less than 10% of the total cost. So this is an example where economic development is stepping up to fund an important project for their community. And then back to the next fast rising concern, which is support for small businesses. And this is going to be more information about what are the pieces that are missing. So folks on our survey have mentioned for years that they feel like they're being overlooked as small businesses, but the concern is getting more urgent and it has climbed in the rankings. And they're telling us they're frustrated because it seems like big incentives favor recruiting outside companies and chasing smokestacks, while local entrepreneurs are left out. And hardly anyone at all in the survey talked about wanting to recruit outside businesses. Most folks were a lot more interested in talking about growing their own local businesses, supporting what's already here. And we've heard some promising small business supports, from retail support grants to intensive entrepreneur support programs like Mashup Labs Dream Business Program. And then before we go into the slow moving challenges, we do have Evangeline says, in our community, the housing that may have been affordable has been captured by lodging like Airbnb, et cetera. Statistically, we have more housing units than the population requires, but nearly 30% are second homes and the lodging shift. And we are in a tourist economy, which makes a lot of sense. And Allie's chiming right in. The same in my town. My neighborhood fabric is being degraded by short-term rentals. I have hardly any neighbors and everyone is just there short-term. So this is definitely, that's one that we have heard from folks as well. It's not gotten as many mentions on the survey, but it's definitely one of the important elements of where housing is going in rural communities. Deb?
So after those persistent challenges and the fast rising concerns, we also have some slow building issues. These started low, but they've continued to climb over 10 years now. These three stand out. New volunteers are needed. The online competition is killing small business, and we need more usable buildings for businesses. So let's take a look at these. Volunteers have always been one of the greatest strengths of rural communities. But over the years, finding enough helping hands has become a critical challenge. Since 2021, the shortage of volunteers has climbed to the top 5 concerns. Over and over, people mention the same small group of dedicated folks doing all the heavy lifting, and it's leading to burnout. That makes it tough to keep our events and organizations that do define our communities alive. Successful communities are rethinking how they ask for help. Catherine Witherington from Walla Walla, Washington, is moving away from putting people on committees. She's not putting them on committees. Nobody likes the endless meetings. Instead, she's thinking of people as a talent pool that she can call on when needed. She asked for just an hour or two of their time for a specific task. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to pitch in when it's simple like that, flexible, and doesn't feel like a lifetime sentence. The next slow building challenge is competition from online sales. And it's putting more and more pressure on our small town businesses. Back in 2015 and 2017, folks mostly worried about the big box stores moving in. But that conversation has shifted. Online competition, it's the new bully everyone's up against. Businesses struggle to make their marketing fit both online and in real life, while also trying to be more engaging and provide an experience people want to enjoy. Let me share what Kevin at Interior Spaces in Iowa is doing. Now, he mainly sells furniture and flooring, and now he offers more local and handmade products that are hard to find anywhere else. They're not online, really. And he shoots simple videos to showcase these unique offerings online. Now, we're going to share more small business suggestions when we get down to the action step section. Our final slow growing challenge is the lack of usable buildings. This often catches outsiders off guard. Back in 2015, this issue was just a middle of the pack concern, about on par with the challenge of getting a small business loan. Now, the lack of usable buildings has climbed into the top few challenges facing rural businesses, while finding a loan has slipped down the list. This problem is tightly connected to the decline of our rural downtowns and a general lack of investment in our small town infrastructure. Do you see this in your town? One person or a handful of people buying up multiple buildings? It's especially frustrating when those buildings sit empty or they get used for cheap storage. These buildings are not maintained, they are not available for new businesses, and they drag down the whole look and feel of downtown. There are plenty of good ideas out there, like that divided empty buildings and the shared retail space in Colfax that we shared. But here's an idea: empty building registries can help too. Centerville, South Dakota adopted a local vacant building ordinance that really makes it less desirable to use those empty spaces for cheap storage. Now, fees are charged for rundown, dilapidated properties, and that's in an attempt to discourage those absent property owners from holding on to properties that really could be turned into businesses.
Evangeline also says that they have $3 style stores in their area. And I think the town that I've seen that's been has one of the worst situations on dollar stores is Fairview, Oklahoma, the one that did the housing where they did the tour and drove past all the housing. Had a beautiful downtown, very full, a great downtown movie theater, and some small retail, and $2 stores set up right at the end of the main street, across from each other, like they always do. And I just thought, poor Fairview, right? Like what a horrible thing to have happened to their downtown. So it's a tricky thing. I know Amoeba talks about dollar store issues a lot. So our next part of the survey is appreciating assets. On the very first survey that we ran, we didn't even ask people about their assets. We just said, what are your challenges? And they started volunteering their assets. So since then, we have included that on every single survey since then. And this, our strength as rural communities comes from some really great assets, including natural resources and our social bonds, our entrepreneurship, our workforce again, and action on broadband assets. And there were actually a lot of other assets mentioned, like we kind of grouped up the most common ones, but there's a whole bunch more that are much more specific for each community. And that just shows you what the variety is of rural communities today across the US and Canada. So let's look at the most mentioned ones. And the first big asset is natural resources. So when we ask them what makes their community special, natural resources always tops the list, but they never say natural resources. They talk about easy access to the outdoors. They talk about hiking and fishing and hunting, and they talk about just the fact they live in a beautiful area. And they also mention how natural resources play a significant part in their local economies. But again, they're not saying natural resources, they're saying farming and ranching, or they talk about mining and forestry. And with, again, a lot of mentions for how those are well managed and that they see them as long-term assets to help their communities thrive. And then we have, just little things like this is from Henrietta, Texas, and there's a few miles of road from the interstate into the town. And all along there's just this beautiful display of native wildflowers that just grow all up and down the ditches. Now, they let them grow for a long time. And not only does this save money on mowing, but it also makes that drive into town kind of a showcase of their natural beauties. So there's lots of people in the community who help maintain the beautification in the community. And there's an older guy who makes native wildflower seed bombs, and he drives around looking for appropriate areas like wasteland and throws his carefully designed seed bombs there to spread native wildflowers. Now, connecting to community is another one of our assets. And there's been a lot that's been written over the years about strong social bonds in rural areas and small towns. And it's complex because we have stronger ties often between groups who are similar, but weaker ties across groups who are different. And one way that social bonds play a very positive role is through that sense of connection to the community itself. So that sense of connection helps people focus on solving problems, addressing their own challenges. And Deb was actually in Okolona, Mississippi at a local event. And as a group, they went out and they walked around the town and they started looking for the positive things that were happening to emphasize that sense of connection. And people kept stepping to the side to have side conversation and talk about taking action on those new ideas. Like somebody came up with the idea of painting more murals on their underpasses. And so they were immediately trying to get that into action. And that kind of connection is one of our best rural assets. And we've talked about workforce as a challenge, and it's back now as one of our assets because rural entrepreneurs say that their team, their people, is one of their biggest assets. And finding enough good people is one of their biggest struggles. So it's not just about hiring employees. This is tangled up with the availability of housing and childcare and other industries. So you can't take a job if there's not going to be a place to live, and you can't work if somebody you trust can't watch your kids. And so these issues tend to pile up, and it makes it tough for businesses and families both. So, and one of the big hurdles we do hear about on the survey is the lack of quality jobs in rural communities, because we've had a shift over time to more lower wage service jobs that just don't stretch far enough on their own. One Kansan said $10 an hour doesn't cut it. So, which I have to agree. So people end up juggling multiple jobs and often without any benefits, trying to make their ends meet. So one great action story on this came out of Jefferson, Iowa. Local coffee shop was struggling to find people to join their team as baristas. And so they tried an experiment of raising the starting pay to $15 an hour. And almost overnight, they got 47 applications, including a bunch of well-qualified people. And to pay that higher wage, going to $15 an hour, they bumped up the price of a specialty coffee by 25 cents. And Rich Osborne, who's the owner there, he said, I have never seen turnout like this to a job posting. So it turned out to be a very workable way to make it go. And then one asset that surprised us as we were doing our analysis is broadband. because broadband has made a real shift. It was originally on our survey a big headache and is becoming a true asset. So when we looked back at our surveys from 2015 through about 2019, nearly every mention of broadband was lack of access, lack of speed. And today that conversation has changed. Folks are a lot more likely to talk about broadband and fiber as strengths, or they mention the steps their communities are taking to improve their broadband. And since 2021, we've only had a handful of people who have brought up lack of broadband as a problem. That doesn't mean it's not a problem anywhere. That just means it has really shifted the number of people who are reporting it as a problem. Now, how did communities make progress? If we look at McKee, Kentucky, this is a town of just 800 people. They became an early national leader in rural broadband. They have People's Rural Telephone Cooperative there. Keith Gabbard is one of their leaders. And so every home and business in McKee has had high-speed fiber internet since 2014. So if your broadband is not an asset yet, it is time to bring your key players together and kick off some action of your own. Now, before we go into the demographic shifts, we have some comments in the chat that I will bring up. Okay. Carrie says, Dollar General threatened litigation when our village council told them no. They threatened. It sounds like you maybe got away, Carrie, without them actually taking that. So that would be interesting to hear the follow-up on that. Carrie also says, pardon me, that our natural environment is a huge draw, but we have a problem with dumping because we don't have good solid waste service. They have out-of-town management. And that's one of those specific local challenges that you're going to solve working together within your community. And it sounds like a serious issue. So Evangeline says the coffee shop story gives credence to the imperative of sharing the profits. The problem to confront is when you believe that scarcity is the reality. Good point, Evangeline. Carrie says, no, we don't have a good news answer because the Dollar General did move in because the town could not afford to go to court or didn't think they could afford to go to court. So that's a sad ending for that one. That's in Cuba, New Mexico. All right, so I think I'm caught up on the chat room. Feel free to again throw in your local stories. Anything you agree with, disagree with, want more detailed information on, feel free to throw those in the chat as we go. And Deb, I think you're ready to do demographics.
I am, and it's another major area that we looked at with our survey. And the demographic trends definitely are reshaping rural communities. And it's happening in ways that outside observers might not always notice. Now, rural folks actually see a lot more nuance and variety within their own towns than people might expect. When asked about differences, rural people did mention race and ethnicity, but also things like age, the youth versus seniors, education and job skills, business backgrounds, and even different cultures and ideas. Folks also brought up the gender spectrum from LGBTQIA identities, but income and class and abilities and disabilities and family structure, religion, political views, and military service. It's a much broader and richer picture than you might guess if you're looking in from the outside. What was the main challenge people talked about? I love this, figuring out how to be more welcoming to everyone who calls their town home. That's where the real work and opportunity are for rural communities moving forward. How can you be more welcoming?
Evangeline also says in her tourism area, housing is being purchased by climate migrants, and it will be interesting to see how that lasts. And Ajax asks, and let me know if I'm pronouncing it correct as Ajax or if it's pronounced differently. All right, he's nodding. We're going with it. All right, so are you aware of McKinsey's report on supporting local businesses as the best path forward for rural communities? And yeah, we are aware of it. And yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on the McKinsey report because we didn't just discover rural, so we've been talking about rural for a while. So yeah, I have lots of thoughts there. Okay, Christina says no issue with healthcare. Now that's a really interesting question, Christina, because healthcare does get mentioned, but not as often as our big challenges, or it's not one of our persistent challenges. It's not been one of the fast rising ones. It's not one of those that has been slow growing. It has been one of the things that gets mentioned, but has not, hasn't shot up in results, or, it has not come up to be a significant level in our answers so far. As we've had a lot of changes lately in rural healthcare, will we see different results in our next biannual survey? That will be a very interesting question to see, is how do things change over time? And that's one of the great things we love about having 10 years worth of data, is that we can go back and see it. So again, healthcare is a very specific local issue. So some places have a big issue with it, whereas most of our responses are not focusing on it. So I hope I gave you a little richer picture of what that sounds like.
Yeah, the next survey will be very interesting, I think. And rural healthcare has never been the best. So maybe it's that consistent, never been the best. People are used to it, frankly.
Pardon me for laughing at that. We're just used to it, right?
Yeah.
We're just used to it. Oh my gosh. Okay, Ariel has a point about to address the lack of affordable housing in Las Vegas, New Mexico. We've started working with Project Moxie out of Colorado. They have great and exciting things. They have been great, and exciting things are developing here. You can learn more about them at goprojectmoxie.com. So there's a little neat resource for folks to check out. Yeah, and I've heard of them. Okay, so now we're down to our action steps. Again, feel free, share resources, stories, examples, other questions right in the chat, because we want to make this as interactive as we can. So in our action steps, taking it all together, looking at the assets and the challenges, the demographics, the stories. And so we put together some action steps, because we never like to just put stuff out there and go, you figure out what to do with it. We like to share stories that are promising, communities that are taking action. And we're not primarily trying to say, oh, you should add a whole new thing to stuff that you're already doing, because I know you're busy. You have plenty going on. But we want to give you some suggestions that may help you adjust what you're already doing, so that it can be even more effective. And Deb has one of those stories to share.
I do. And the first action is to tailor support to your specific community concerns and assets. This is especially true for groups that serve more than one community, as well as people trying to use ideas they heard about at conferences and events. We hear so often about people doing generic things that don't necessarily match their communities. You can use this report and our ongoing Survey of Rural Challenge results as they become available, and listen to the people in the community before you make key decision responses. In Webster City, Iowa, there were 14 empty buildings downtown. And rather than continue to ignore them, we held an empty buildings tour. We showcased those buildings. I mean, we bragged and showed them off before, during, and after the tour. There ended up being 12 buildings on the tour. Get this, in 18 months, 10 of those buildings were filled. That successfully changed the trajectory of everything we did, because it was tailored to exactly what was most on people's minds and what they most wanted to see.
Now, when you're taking action for small business support, which is a critical thing for y'all, we want you to especially pay more attention to marketing. And we've already talked about workforce in other slides, but our survey shows that rural business owners are really pretty innovative with their businesses and marketing. They tell us they're looking for new ideas. They tell us about new things they're doing that help put a better focus on great experiences. We heard a lot in the most recent survey about people creating experiences for their customers. And one example that I've seen out in the wild is this collaborative marketing sign that I saw in a parking lot in rural California. And it was restaurant customers get this special discount at the women's fashion shop across the street. And that's the kind of simple cooperation that every community can encourage. But I tell you, the number of businesses who mention marketing as their main challenge is astounding. It is a huge concern. And so I don't think it gets as much attention as what small businesses would really love the support from.
And that sign shows a great partnership too. I like seeing businesses working together like that. It's also interesting that business plan workshops and pitch competitions are still popular offerings from support organizations, while rural small business owners on our survey just aren't that interested in them. Zero people mentioned wanting pitch competition or business plan help. What they told us they really need is help finding usable commercial buildings. In fact, finding a building to run a business in came up way more often than finding a business loan. Every year, we hear about new small business lending programs being rolled out, but there's hardly any buzz about efforts to actually increase the number of usable buildings in our small towns. Business people like this artist, Rose Ellis, say that smaller spaces with lower risk help them be more successful. Now, Rose moved from a huge loft space to a tiny corner of a shared retail building. And she said to you couldn't get me out of here with a crowbar. It's the best business plan I never would have thought of. It has turned my life around.
And as
Yeah.
we've talked a little bit about small businesses and the big business incentives. So if you want to see more small businesses, you're going to need to offer incentives that direction. So this is something that you have to talk to your city officials, your economic development folks about, to find ways to offer targeted incentives that help local owners with real costs. And I mean real costs. I'm talking building repairs. I'm talking complying with regulations, and instead of just offering those perks to outside businesses. And I have to say that as I was looking at some targeted incentive projects to share here, the number of economic development grants that I saw that are open only to 501c3 nonprofits, and I just kept thinking, if they're only open to nonprofits, is that really economic development? So just a little question from the real world here. So it is best when these incentives are simple and flexible. So Awesome South Shore, this was my favorite example that I wanted to bring to you today, because they are in Nova Scotia. They give out $1,000 in no strings attached grants, and they do this every quarter. They offer several grants every quarter. The application form asks only 5 questions, and one of them's your name and the other's your business name. So this is about as simple as anything that you've ever heard. And so far, they have given over $80,000 to good local businesses and awesome projects around the community. And this is something that was created by everyday local people, not by officials. So if you already have in your community a facade grant, an equipment grant, a matching grant, see if you can get that broadened to cover any reasonable business expense. See if you can get them to make the application as simple as 5 questions, including your name, so that those incentives actually work for real small businesses.
And when you're deciding on rural business support, funnel financial resources to improve housing or childcare, downtowns, and commercial buildings. Consider classifying these to qualify for economic development funding, or moving funding from lower valued services like business plan assistance or pitch competitions or small business lending funds. Randolph, Nebraska turned a dilapidated property into a new spec house, the first spec house in decades. Gary A. Van Meter, community development director there, told us, we had 150 visitors during the open house, including a city administrator from a nearby community. They included built-in storage and workshop areas so it could support potential home-based businesses. This also helped kick off new action on housing improvements.
Now, finally, the biggest finding we had throughout the entire 10 years and 2,200 responses of this survey came down to this one thing: being open to new ideas. Good ideas get stifled by conflict and negativity and old way thinking. And we found that communities that are open to new ideas can thrive. And this is the core of our idea-friendly method, is to make it possible for people from all walks of life, all cultures, all ages, to be involved in their communities in small but meaningful ways. And we have some really great conversation going in the chat, and I really want to get there. So we'll start with Carrie, and Deb's going to want to weigh in on this. Carrie says, we have a lot of old neglected buildings on Main Street that either need to be demolished or expensively rehabilitated. See, this is why we said redirect that facade grant to do like extensive rehabilitation. And many could likely qualify for historical preservation. So sneaky ways to make that work is you talk to your statewide historic preservation organization, your Main Street organization, which also has an interest in that. And here's the sneaky tip. Talk to contractors who work on those type of projects in other towns because they know where the funding came from. And they are more likely to talk to you because they'd also like to do your project. So that's the sneaky tip on finding money and resources to address those expensive rehabilitation issues. Deb, do you want to say something about old buildings?
Well, I like the old buildings, and I know that you don't want to start at the city council level. Don't go to the federal or to the local government and say, you need to fix this, you need to do that. Start with building relationships with those building owners. Have that conversation and find out what's going on. Don't have meetings and don't make committees. Just, I don't know, meet at the coffee shop and tell everybody, come on over, we're going to talk about these buildings downtown, and see what comes out of that. You're going to see the people that are really interested, and you might see some people that could do something down the road. Don't expect big steps from everybody. You want to do those small but meaningful things. It matters if somebody posts on Facebook about it that might not be able to go to the meeting. It matters that they're sharing that information. That's a very small step. And who knows who's going to see it and show up and have something to say about it.
You can tell that Deb has like an entire hour presentation on filling empty buildings.
I do.
So, all right. So if Ajax has another good point, which is, okay, so if debt availability is not an issue, why are businesses not building their own buildings? Okay. So I didn't say debt availability is not an issue. I said debt availability is not something that doesn't stop them as often as the availability of the buildings. That doesn't mean they want to borrow money even. Right. So that's actually not implied. And they didn't mention wanting, having difficulty finding a loan. They didn't check that off of the list of choices. They didn't talk about it in the open-ended stuff. They didn't say, man, we really, being stopped by finding a loan doesn't come up that often. But I think it's because they're not looking to start with loans. Most people who are looking to start businesses who might go into downtown buildings, they're like trying to start this big, right? Like they want to be this big to start with, which is like really tiny. Maybe they only want, enough to be a one booth, or they really only have enough stuff to like fill the first 20 feet of a space when it's actually, a long downtown building of, 50 feet or more in depth. They can't fill all of that. So I think the difference there is, we have people who are being activated by our pop-up shops. They're doing business booths. They're trying small things, and they just want to go to the next step, and they don't want to mortgage their house or, affect their family's finances for 3 generations. They just want to go to that next small step. And that does not mean I want to borrow $1 million and build a really nice building. So I think that's, as someone who has borrowed money and built a building before in order to have a place to put a business, I hear what you're saying. I really do. Okay. 2 questions about the local business, the $1,000 business grants that were in Nova Scotia. That organization is called Awesome South Shore. And that's the name of the organization. You can find them. If you Google that, you will find them. And what defines good local businesses? And actually their thing, they're just like, the qualifying question is, tell us what's awesome about your idea. And it can be business. It can be a project for the community. It can be anything unexpected and awesome that's going to benefit the South Shore area. So Awesome South Shore. And they do have a group that sits down and evaluates all of these, but you still don't need to ask a lot of questions to figure out if something's awesome and makes the group of people go, ooh, I really wish we had this. Then I think that's the qualifying piece right there. Carrie is like hands in the air for one of those there. And Deb mentions Mashup Labs. Mashup Labs is our contact who told us about that Awesome South Shore program. All right. David has like numbers and like an organized questionnaire. All right.
I'm ready for that one too.
Are you there? Okay. Have you ever measured personal and community resilience and the attendant loss of social cohesion? I recognize that many of the fixes co-create more vibrant communities. Okay, so no, we're measuring our measurement has been, tell us your challenges, tell us your assets, Tell us your small business challenges. Tell us your small business assets. Tell us about who's in your community. And then the wild card, tell us anything else you wanted to tell us. So we are not nearly as academic as your question sounded. It's very, very, and I will say the reports from every other year as we have done this, those reports are available, and feel free there. SurveyOfRuralChallenges.com will get you a chance to download all those PDFs. Deb, did you want to say something about measuring personal and community resilience
No,
and
but
the attendant loss of social cohesion?
No, I want to talk about the other big challenge, which is
Okay.
the trapping of resources in silos.
Mm,
So a very simple suggestion is to invite your local group of nonprofits, maybe it's 5 of them, out to have coffee and tell them to bring their calendars. Sit down and go over what's going with them. It's an opportunity to start looking at resources because they're going to share, oh yeah, by the way, we did this, or we're going to do this. And you start hearing these things. How can you partner?
yeah.
How can you work with them?
Oh,
How can
you're
you
doing
change
that.
the
Can you bring,
dates?
yeah, can you bring what you're doing to the group of people we're working with? Can we add something we're doing? I've gotten to watch these kind of events happen in
And me too.
Iowa and Nevada, and like been there personally and listened to those conversations, and people start seeing opportunities to share with each other.
And
And I'm,
we're rural communities. We know each other. It behooves us to start talking to each other. We
okay, let
forget
me,
to do that sometimes.
yeah, let me read David's second, the exact wording of what he asks. He says, the other big challenge I notice is the trapping of resources in silos. And the next question, what happens when external funding sources dry up? Can we be more intentionally self-sustaining, better together? And then he says, oh, you're already talking about it with be open to new ideas, which we are. But I have to say this question of what happens when the funding dries up. And I want to share the story from North Carolina when Curtis Wynn started as the executive director of the Roanoke Electric Cooperative there. He saw, it was like the 1990s, and if you're really old and in the development world, you may remember, were they enterprise zones in the 1990s? Somebody that's older than me probably remembers exactly. That was the enterprise zones, I think, at that time. And so they were going to apply for an enterprise zone for their 4-county area. And so they pulled together all these organizations from across 4 counties. It's also an incredibly diverse area with a wide variation in incomes, different cultures, all different kinds of folks together. And pulling that different of a set of people together to try to cooperate on writing the application for this, Curtis said, I've got to help them meet each other, and took an idea from Black Church, which was there will always be a fellowship meal. There will always be a fellowship meal. So they planned time to meet each other as people. And he said they designed it so they intentionally left space for people to have side conversations before they got down to work every time. And so they spent the better part of a year working on that application, and then they got turned down. But because they had spent the better part of a year getting to know each other, they said, let's keep going. Let's work on our own issues. And so that gets to the heart of your question, which is what happens when external funding dries up? They never got the external funding. And normally that is like it for that kind of collaboration. Like, oh, we only came together to like check the box and apply. Instead, they came together as people. And people have to come together as people before they can collaborate. So that's an insight I really wanted to offer in terms of how do you keep the resources from being trapped in the silos, and then how do you keep going when external funding sources dry up. Shelly Ashcroft, Texas Downtown, hey, says check out this tool for ongoing maintenance for buildings, and this is a newmexico.gov link right here. And then here is the link for nationwide. Shelly is right in there. Then that is pacenation.org, PACENATION.org. Norman Christopher, a great new financing tool that is increasing development and use of diversified community investment funds. And the website is nc3now.org. And that is, what's his name? Oh my gosh. What's the guy's name from NC3?
Chris Miller.
Yeah. I got a chance to talk to him recently, and yeah, they're doing really awesome stuff. And I was like, you need to do smaller towns. He's like, no, Like there's kind of a bottom edge on that. And, you know, we talk so often to towns under 1,000 people, and that's a little bit out of their scope. But yeah, if you're a bigger town, nc3now.org. John Grogan wants to know if there will be a recording, and that is Jen. Jen has your recording for you.
Yes,
Stephen,
I will definitely do that.
Stephen is old enough. He remembers empowerment and enterprise zones from back in the 90s. Yeah, that's way back in the day. All right. So last call for questions. And I will put up, like, if you want to know how to get a hold of us, we do have, Stephen has some more background on the empowerment zones. All right, but SaveYour.Town/sign-up, that is our newsletter. We have a newsletter with practical steps you can put into action right away every single week. Deb and I take turns writing those. And then if you think, you know, I wish so-and-so from that other agency or the local board could have heard that, get the full report, which is at surveyoverallchallenges.com or at SaveYour.Town, and show them this recording, because Jen's got you covered on the recording. So Stephen says, our empowerment zone was funded, but when the 10-year program ended, local development groups continued to meet and do good work. There it is again. Having spent 10 years working together, it started some good interactions there.
I think about Jewel, Iowa, a small town, and a group of people, very empty downtown. A group of people, about 10, came together and put some money together and bought one building, and they fixed it up. And they ended up finding a young dentist just out of dental school and helped him get started in his practice. And they took money from that and did the next building. And they did it, and they filled up. The town is full now. It's amazing what they've done. And it's taken about 20 years. That town is full. Yeah. Work together.
Christina, do reach out to us. We'll be glad to talk to you about maybe doing a presentation for your organization as well. And feel free, everybody, you get a copy of the recording, so it's something you can share with groups that you're like, ooh, here, watch this section. We want to talk about this. So, and we thank you for a really rich conversation. You all asked some wonderful questions, shared some excellent examples, and we really appreciate this interaction and what turned into a very good conversation.
That's great. Thank you so much. Again, I will send this recording tomorrow morning. And also, as you're going about your day and you have other questions that come up, you know, reach out to Deb and Becky, but also feel free to, you know, reach out to me. Our next local leaders roundtable is actually going to be about community bonds. And we're looking again across the border to Canada of like how those work and how can we get more things done by financing them through community bonds. So I will send you that link. Anybody who has signed up today, you will get the recording. You will get all the links that were shared today from our fellow attendees and Deb and Becky. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Deb and Becky, for joining us. I've known you both for so long, so it's great to have you on the call today. And thank you all of you who we haven't heard from, but we've seen, for attending today's event. Also, let us know. We're getting ready for next year's local leaders roundtable topics. So if you have something that you wish that Becky and Deb would have covered more deeply, we want to hear that so we can have them back in 2026. So thank you all again. And Carrie, glad you're interested in community bonds. Me too.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks all.